Francis Levy. Ed Nersessian and I are co-directors of the Philoctetes Center. Now, this gentleman here is Ed Nersessian, and he wants you to know he's not a member of the round table. Because of so many people came, he took one of the chairs. So I want to make sure he's not a bona fide member. Before we begin this afternoon's program, I wanted to call your attention to the exhibit on the walls, which has been curated by Hallie Cohen, and not curated, but helped. Hallie, who was the exact curator of the...
Andrew Raftery from Rhode Island School of Design.
Andrew Raftery from the Rhode Island School of Design. Hallie is the overall curator of the exhibition space, but it's a Phillipson Bible and Freud's imagination, and it's attended upon our roundtable on psychoanalysis, Phillipson Bible and Freud's imagination, which we had several weeks ago. And these are images that Freud had studied when he was a child, really on the knee of his father. And so the significance of the exhibition has to do with those kinds of influences that were in making of Sigmund Freud. And if you look at it carefully, it's a rather interesting show. And all Philoctetes roundtables are simulcast. And after the roundtable is over, you can go see it in past programming. You simply go to past programming and hit the button which says the program you want to see. And it comes up usually 3 to 4 days after we have an event. I'm now pleased to introduce Louise Yellen. Louise Yellen is Interim Dean of Humanities, Professor of Literature, and Adjunct Curator at the Neuberger Museum of Art, all at Purchase College, State University of New York. She is the author of From the Margins of Empire, Christina Stead, Doris Lessing, Nadine Gordimer, and numerous essays on feminism, narrative, and identity. She is currently working on 2 projects. She is curating British Subjects, Identity and Self-Fashioning, 1948 through 2000, an exhibition of recent and contemporary self-portraits at the Neuberger Museum of Art, and writing a book entitled British Lives, Windrush to Parak, about autobiography and self-portraiture in Britain since the Second World War. So you can see why we were interested in having Louise Yellen here. Both projects explore the intersection of individual and collective, national and transnational ways of understanding, representing, and fashioning identity. Dr. Yellen will preside and moderate over this afternoon's panel and introduce our other distinguished guests. So take it away, Louise.
Thank you.
I also know Louise for many years.
Yes. Long time.
Yeah.
Because I follow instructions, I'm not going to repeat what's on the website about my co-panelists. So I invite you to look up their entries and hear more about them. I want to thank the Philoctetes Center for inviting me to discuss autobiography and biography with the participants in this roundtable, whom I'll now introduce. First, in alphabetical order, Nicholson Baker has published 7 novels and 4 works of nonfiction, including You and I, a key instance of what autobiography scholars call auto/biographical reflection. He founded the American Newspaper Repository, now at Duke University, and has written about the importance of printed words on paper, among other topics. He has a novel coming out this next September, '09, and he's currently working on a book on the Cold War. Next, David Shields. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, yeah, well, alphabetically, sorry. David Shields has published 10 books of fiction and nonfiction. He's been widely translated and awarded numerous prizes, grants, and fellowships. You can read all about them on the website. His current project is called Reality Hunger, a Manifesto, which will be out from Knopf in 2010. And it's an argument for the obliteration of genre and copyright and in favor of the essay as a writing form. Judith Thurman, whom I've also known for many years, is the author of biographies of Isaac Dinesen and Colette, the latter shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize. She's a staff writer at The New Yorker, and she's currently working on pieces on lost languages, Laura Ingalls Wilder and her daughter, and the French playwright Yasmine Reza. Simon Winchester, who arrived in an ice storm, I was going to make a note that he couldn't make it, but he did, is an author, journalist, and broadcaster who has worked mainly as a foreign correspondent. His numerous books, including The Professor and the Madman, his numerous books include The Professor and the Madman, which is a double biography about James Murray, who's the editor of the OED, and the Mad American Doctor, who was a major contributor to the Enterprise. He's currently writing a biography of the Atlantic Ocean. Well, as moderator, I'm supposed to get this panel going. So I thought I would read a short passage from the book that I'm currently reading. It's Dreams from My Father, Obama's first memoir.
Who is who?
Oh, okay. Judith Thurman, you know, because she's the only woman other than myself on the panel. Nicholson Baker, David Shields, and Simon Winchester.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to read you a passage from early in this memoir when Barack Obama, about to be elected senator, is ruminating on his early life. And he says over and over again, but in different ways, that he doesn't really know who he is. He doesn't really know where he came from. And he can't quite identify with any of the identity groups that want to claim him. Over the next few months, then there's a white space on the page. I like the white spaces. Over the next few months, I looked to corroborate this nightmare vision. I gathered up books from the library: Baldwin, Ellison, Hughes, Wright, Du Bois. At night, I would close the door to my room, telling my grandparents I had homework to do. And there I would sit and wrestle with words, locked in suddenly desperate argument, trying to reconcile the world as I'd found it with the terms of my birth. But there was no escape to be had. In every page of every book, in Bigger Thomas and Invisible Men, I kept finding the same anguish, the same doubt, a self-contempt that neither irony nor intellect seemed able to deflect. Even Du Bois's learning and Baldwin's love and Langston's humor eventually succumbed to its corrosive force. Each man finally forced to doubt art's redemptive power, each man finally forced to withdraw, one to Africa, one to Europe, one deeper into the bowels of Harlem, but all of them in the same weary flight, all of them exhausted, bitter men, the devil at their heels. So I was interested in this passage, among others, because in some way the self written about, that is, the young Barack Obama, finds in his reading some answer to who he thinks he is or who he thinks he might be. It's through his reading that he begins to be able to ask and answer the question, who am I? And I wanted to start off by asking any one of you, you can figure out which one wants to jump in, how similar situations play out in the biographies or autobiographies that you've written. That is, you read, I think I'll start by asking Nicholson, how does the scene of reading play out in your biographical and autobiographical writing, or your thoughts about that writing?
The way it works for me is that we had an alcove in my house that had all these books on it. They had wonderful names that seemed mysterious and interesting, and one was Memoirs of an English Opium Eater. And I thought, and it was a tiny little leather-bound book that had my grandfather's signature in it. And I knew he'd had a drinking problem. And I thought, my God, this is fascinating. Maybe this is the key to everything. And I pulled it down, and it was this just lush, non-fictional, but highly elaborated prose chronicle that attained a kind of poetry that I loved. That was about this man's travails with opium. So that was for me. It was just that we had a lot of old books in my house, and I would pull them down and read them, and some of them pulled me in and made me want to try to even come close.
Oh, in writing about writers, very often they seem to be my subjects, without generalizing too much, they're often people who are born into a milieu which is not, it doesn't really offer them a reflection, which they seek in books from, they seek friendships, a sort of kind of spiritual friendships with other writers. And that becomes a real community of people whom they probably will never meet or may not ever need to meet, but that is the world that's real to them. And I was writing about Antonia Byat's Possession many years ago, and you start out by having a kind of love affair with another writer who becomes an important person in your life, and that sort of, you graduate from that into a love affair with language. I think that's the trajectory for many writers whom I've written about. Certainly it was true of Dennison, and coming from a very bourgeois family and longing for a kind of grandeur that she got from books. So it's sometimes a product of isolation.
I'd certainly, in writing about James Murray, editor of the OED, has no better starting point than the OED itself, of course, his monument, which certainly imbues one with an enormous respect for language and a great fondness and love for it. So, but it is enormous. There's a chap called Amon Shea who's just written a book called Reading the OED, in which he spent an entire year reading however many 13,000 pages of it, and I didn't do that, admittedly. But I think to know where Murray was coming from, it was important to know where he went, and to therefore read or immerse oneself in the majesty of the OED, and I certainly did that to a very great degree.
You asked Louise about reading as a site for your own writing project, and for me it's almost literally so, in the sense that this book of mine that's coming out in a year or so is full. I mean, the reading, I feel like that reading and writing have become virtually indistinguishable for me. You know, a lot of my books are sort of collage-like and built from other people's reading, but they've been edited in such a harsh and subjective way, not unlike Nick Baker's Human Smoke, you know, where Nick ostensibly is just running passages from journalistic accounts, but edited them in such a subjective, I would say sort of cutthroat way to make an argument that interests me very much, sort of reading as a form of composition.
Okay, I sent you a note about, I'm a scholar of autobiography, but you're all biographers. So what I really want to ask you about is, okay, here's what Georges Gusdorf, who's a theorist of autobiography, said. He said that autobiography is the testimony of a man about himself. He was writing in the 50s, so we'll excuse him. The testimony of a man about himself, the contest of a being in dialogue with itself. I'm wondering how you think something like this is relevant to the project of biography, if you think it is.
Could you repeat the quote,
sure.
Louise? I didn't quite catch it.
Autobiography is the testimony of a man about himself, the contest of a being in dialogue with itself. So I'm wondering if there's something similar going on in the writing of biography.
Well, you certainly have a dialogue with your subject, often a contentious one. It's very intimate. It resembles parent and child, or two lovers, or two enemies, or a boss, or any sort of kind of duad you can think of is present in the working out of the authority to tell the story. It's very much about authority. It is a dialogue with yourself, in that you have to jettison as you go the scaffolding of received ideas, theories, isms, that help in the beginning to just sort of reduce the enormous amount of material, funnel it into something that's digestible and that is sort of becomes organic, isn't cerebral. And you're the prism, so nothing is objective, but how, I suppose, how you regulate the subjectivity, that comes from your self-scrutiny and your dissatisfaction and your sense that you haven't gotten to the place you want to get to.
None of us here,